What's up, everyone, and welcome into the Fantasy Mafia podcast. By now, everybody's drafts are either just about wrapping up or all done. We're getting ready for week one. So we were going to kick it off with our week one streamers. Now, this one's going to be a tough one because obviously we all just drafted. Most of our bench players are all in there. Our starters are all in there. We kind of already know who we're going into week one with. But every week we're going to bring you a streamer episode. And so today it's going to be a little bit different than how the rest of the season is going to go. We basically just we looked at the ADPs, and we both picked a quarterback outside of the top 12 ADPs, outside of the top 36 running backs, outside of the top 48 wide receivers, and outside of the top 12 kickers, tight ends, and defenses. So just in case these guys are lingering around on your waiver wire and you're kind of questionable on who to start this week, these might be a couple of guys that you might be looking into. So kicking it off with QBs, Doc, who do you got? Who do you got as a good streamer for a week one QB?
So I'll preface this by saying normally if I'm planning on streaming a guy, I will draft him in one of the last few rounds. So if I do draft a defense, for example, in my draft, and the defense that you're going to talk about is one that I really like this week as well, but I've drafted them pretty frequently with my last pick. That way I don't have to fight for them on the waiver wire or pick them up later. So if you're really struggling at the end of the draft, I don't think there's anything wrong with taking somebody that you're planning on streaming, even if it's just week one. Because I mean, a lot of times I think we get wrapped up in looking way too far down the line, but realistically, it's week by week, just like Bill Belichick says. So.
Yep.
And I listen to Bill Belichick. So, to kick it off with my QB, it's a guy, he had a lot of success against them last year, but it's Jimmy Garoppolo of the 49ers. They're playing the Arizona Cardinals week one. I do think the Cardinals defense is going to be improved this season. We saw them draw some attention there with the Devondre Campbell and their linebacking core. They also brought in Isaiah Simmons via the draft, but Jimmy Garoppolo had his best fantasy numbers against the Cardinals last season. Week 9, they played the Cardinals, and he was a second-rate quarterback that week. And they also played him week 11, and he was the fourth ranked quarterback that week, averaged over 29 points against them. So even with an improved defense, I think this is a guy that's not really being drafted right now that could be a top 10 QB week one. And, we've mentioned their struggles against tight ends pretty frequently in past pods. And I don't think they're going to struggle quite as much this season, but the reality is Isaiah Simmons is a rookie. He's not going to be a stud from day one, and it's a tough task. I'd expect him to possibly be lined up with George Kittle week one, and that's a welcome to the NFL if I've ever heard of one. So I still think that the defense is going to need time to improve over the course of the season. So I think Jimmy G can really be a top 10 option in week one. I know a lot of people aren't streaming QBs, but there's been a few times for me where I just haven't been in a draft position where I was comfortable taking a QB. And I didn't even draft a QB in a few leagues, which seems crazy, but I actually just picked up Jimmy G after the draft, and I'm going to roll with him because the Cardinals, I think, are a really favorable matchup for him.
All right, yeah, I like that matchup a lot too. Jimmy G, he's definitely going either undrafted or going really late because of basically just the offense. I mean, he really doesn't have any wide receivers, and they're primarily a running team. So definitely an under the radar pick right there. I could see him being used in a lot of DFS, especially because Arizona, they didn't really have a good defense last year, and while they may be better this year, it's definitely going to take some time to gel. And
Yep.
speaking of time to gel, that kind of has to go with my quarterback too. My quarterback also has to gel with his offense, but they're playing against a defense that um, has some new pieces on there, and they also, but they're going to take some time to get together. And that's Cam Newton. Cam Newton, he's going out there. He was officially named the starter, so he's starting there for New England. When he's healthy and he's going into the season healthy, he's a borderline QB1 consistently. He gives you that rushing upside. He's not only is he a big body quarterback that he can throw the ball, so he's going to be looking at guys like N'Keal Harry and Julian Edelman towards the end zone. But he could also run it in if they're inside the five, so you got that rushing upside with him too. Like I mentioned with Miami, they brought in Kyle Van Noy, they brought in Byron Jones from Dallas, so Their defense is definitely a lot better on paper than it was last year. Obviously, they had a bunch of picks in this year's draft, but it's gonna be a good game. I think that Miami has enough power on offense to kind of go back and forth with New England. So it's not just gonna be a run the ball with Sony Michel and Damian Harris and whoever else is back there for the New England offense. I think we could see a nice back and forth semi high scoring game between these two because New England also did lose a lot on defense, and that's going to give Cam Newton a lot of opportunity to put the ball in the end zone and get some fantasy points there.
Yeah, Cam Newton against the Dolphins is a really interesting one in week one. I actually kind of like the Dolphins defense this year with Brian Flores. Obviously, we know they made a ton of moves this offseason, so I think this is a nice test for Cam in week one to see really where that offense stands. And I think we'll be able to tell quickly whether or not that offense is going to gel or whether they're not. So the Dolphins, there's a lot of question marks there because their defense was kind of pitiful last year, but they do have a strong defensive-minded head coach and a lot of new pieces. So on both sides, offensively and defensively, we'll see how they gel.
Exactly. Moving on to the running back, who do you have for your running back outside the top 36?
So I have a guy who still plays in the NFL, even though I don't know if a lot of people still realize that. But mine is Marlon Mack, actually, and he falls just outside of that range that you mentioned, the top 36. And in some drafts, he is taken as a top 36 running back. But I consistently see him continue to drop. And the reality is, I think everybody's kind of on the same page that Jonathan Taylor is just not going to take that backfield day one. Yet we're not drafting Marlon Mack. And I think that's the perfect example of people looking way too far down the road. If Jonathan Taylor is going to dominate the second half of the season, that's fantastic. But if Marlon Mack is dominating the first half, why is he going 10 rounds later than Jonathan Taylor? I mean, the first 8 games of the season still matter. And there's no doubt in my mind that Jonathan Taylor has all the talent in the world. But Marlon Mack is going against the Jacksonville Jaguars in week one. That's a game where the Colts, they should be able to shut down the Jags offense. The Colts have a very strong defense. They really are going to probably focus on controlling the clock, and a big part of that game plan is going to be running Marlon Mack. And even if Jonathan Taylor's involved, there's going to be enough carries for both of them. And, I'll caution people that you can't look too much on what their stats were last season. But, I mean, the Jaguars' defense has actually gotten worse. So, I mean, I am looking at how Marlon Mack did against the Jaguars last year because you could argue that his numbers should be even better because their defense is even worse than it was last season. So, and it goes with the Cardinals when I talked about Jimmy G is, okay, I'm looking at last season, but I'm also analyzing what's changed this offseason. So, in the early part of the year, it's tough because you got to kind of balance both of those. But, I mean, when you look at Marlon Mack against the Jaguars last year, he was the 11th running back that week 11, and then they also played them week 17, and he was RB12. So he actually showed RB1 upside against the Jaguars. I do think that Jonathan Taylor, like I said, he's going to eat into those carries a little bit, but I mean, we could be looking at a top 20 week from Marlon Mack, and I mean, he keeps going so late in drafts. And if you're starting Marlon Mack in your flex in the first 8 weeks, that's not anything to be ashamed of because I think this is a guy with RB2 upside that you can get as a, beyond a flex player right now. He's going as a depth bench piece right now. So week one has huge upside for you if you're a Marlon Mack owner.
Yep, I like that. I like him. I like Kerryon Johnson for that same reason. Where I mean, they got rookies behind them. Some banged up like DeAndre Swift, but even if they were going into the season healthy, it's week one here. The rookie they didn't have a lot of work in preseason because there was no preseason. So I do like Marlon Mack. I do like Kerryon Johnson. I also this is a deeper one. Mine's going to be a little bit deeper, but it's Boston Scott for Philadelphia. Miles Sanders has been a little banged up this offseason, but they're in a really plus matchup here, and it could be one of those things where even if Miles Sanders plays, which all the signs are leaning towards Miles Sanders playing, but if they get out to a big enough lead, then they could start throwing in the backups. And Boston Scott being that guy, I think he's still going to have a little bit of standalone value. Now, if you're in a single flex league, I don't know if I'd really start him there, but if you got more than one flex, multiple flexes, I know me and you are in a league where we have 5 flexes.
Yeah.
That's a league where I mean, you're kind of forced to start Boston Scott because there's a lot of positions on that team. But
He's a stud in that league.
yeah, he's it's crazy how that league's set up. But even then, yeah, if you got multiple flexes in your league, Boston Scott I think is a good play because of the matchup that they have. Now, again, Washington, one of their bright spots is probably going to be their defense. But just like we talked about with Miami's defense, and just like we talked about with I forgot who your first defense was. Um,
I'm gonna make you work for it. No, it's the Cardinals.
Yeah, just like we talked about with the Cardinals defense, just like we talked about with Miami's defense, they've gotten better, but they're going to take some time to get together. Chase Young, the number 2 overall pick this year, he's more of a pass rusher too, so he's not really a huge threat to the run game with Miles Sanders and Boston Scott. But yeah, I mean, I think Boston Scott he's got the potential. It's going to be like one of those things where in a lot of these plus matchups where they're going up against maybe the Giants, going up against the Reds or the football team, going up
Well,
against a lot of these lesser teams if they end up playing Jacksonville. I don't know if they have them on their schedule or not. You're going to see Sanders for maybe three quarters and then start throwing in the backups, kind of like what we saw with Baltimore last year. And I'm not saying that the Philadelphia offense is as extreme as Baltimore's was last year, but I could see them kind of giving those other guys a break just so we can get the guy because we know what Boston Scott can do. He's a good running back. It's not like we're not throwing a guy into the fire and saying here let's give Miles Sanders a break. We know that Boston Scott is good and he's going to show in some weeks he's going to have that opportunity to show what he can do.
I mean, for me as a Miles Sanders fan that I can't approve of this pick, but I mean, that backfield is interesting because Doug Peterson has historically used a backfield by committee. I don't know if recently he's had a back that's been as talented as Miles Sanders, but I think that's an interesting backfield to monitor from day one. I know a lot of people are high on Miles Sanders like I am, but I mean, the reality is Boston Scott is going to get touches. He's probably going to take anywhere between 8 and 12 in a normal week. And if the game flow dictates where the Eagles are up, he probably is going to be closer to 15.
Yep, and I'm just going to jump right into my wide receiver too because it's from the
Fine.
same team. And I mean, I've already talked a lot about the Washington defense, anyways, so might as well just not repeat myself. But Deshaun Jackson is my wide receiver. He always seems to do really well against former teams too. Obviously, he's played against Washington, or he's played for Washington. This is his second time around in Philadelphia. He's really going into the season as the only healthy startable wide receiver for the Eagles. I think a lot of the targets are going to go to guys like Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert and Miles Sanders out of the backfield. But Deshaun Jackson, he's still, even though he's up in his 30s, he's still a burner on the outside. I mean, he's like one of the top best ball plays even for week 1. I think he's going to end up with double-digit targets, 125, 150 yards, and even 2 touchdowns. I mean, that's the kind of game that you can probably get out of Deshaun Jackson in week 1, and then he'll disappear for a few weeks. But we'll talk about different streamers other weeks. But yeah, Deshaun Jackson, he's got a plus matchup. Carson Wentz is going into the season healthy. Deshaun Jackson seems to be the only healthy receiver on this team that isn't either a rookie or a guy that doesn't have a lot of time in the league. So give me all the shares of Deshaun Jackson in best ball. Let me play him in DFS, and let me throw him into my flex spot in week 1.
Yeah, Deshaun Jackson is always an interesting one. I personally am never a fan of starting him just because he's so streaky and you can get that 125-yard line and 1 or 2 touchdowns. But if there's a week to do it, it's definitely this week. We've talked about the improvements with the football team. I had to think about that. I didn't want to make a Jerry mistake. I don't want to say that former name, but the Washington front 7 is really improved, but when you look at their secondary, it's still not very good. So there's some opportunity for, I would say, the Eagles wide receivers, but I guess it's just Deshaun Jackson
Yep.
at this point because, I mean, I've taken Arcega-Whiteside a few times in late in drafts because they don't really have any other options, so this is his chance. But if there's a guy to start, I actually have another one of their pass catchers for a streamer at another position, so I do think there's some opportunity there.
Geez, they got to throw up 51 points or something now for us to be
Yeah,
right.
they're gonna have to.
Who's your wide receiver?
My wide receiver is, well, I mean, I guess it's kind of 2. It's James Washington / Deontay Johnson, because I think they play the Giants this week, and the Giants gave James Bradbury a pretty sizable contract in their secondary, 3 years, $45 million over from the Panthers. I think he's going to be locked in with Juju, and we kind of saw that when Juju was a wide receiver one before. He got all the team's top corners, and that's why I think he struggled a little bit. So this is a big year for him. But when you look at the rest of the Giants secondary, let me just throw some names out there for their starting cornerbacks: Corey Ballantyne, Darnay Holmes, and Brandon Williams.
Oh, studs.
I don't really know who those guys are. I'm sure some Giants fans, probably not even most Giants fans, are well acquainted with those names. But I think there's going to be an opportunity for the secondary pieces in the Steelers' passing offense to have some volume, especially if Juju gets locked down. I mean, I'm favoring Deontay Johnson. James Washington kind of fits into that mold of Deshaun Jackson for me. He's more of a deep threat. So in a PPR league, I'd be a lot more comfortable with Deontay because I don't think he's going to be drawing top coverage from the Giants. So I think the Giants defense should be improved. That's not saying much because they weren't very good last year. They gave up the fourth most fantasy points to wide receivers last year. I don't think that'll change too significantly. You probably won't see him top 5 in points allowed, but probably top 10. I mean, James Bradbury makes a difference, but not that much of a difference. So I think you'll see some opportunity week 1 Steelers versus the Giants.
Yeah, that's on Monday night. That's going to be a good game. I think we get a healthy Big Ben back, so get to see if he's fully healthy and lead that Pittsburgh team that almost made the playoffs last year. All right, going into the tight ends. I know you mentioned you have this is where you have your Eagle, I believe. So if you want to start out with him, I'll let you go there, and then I'll go to mine.
Fine, I see how it is. But yeah, I mean, so mine is Dallas Goedert, and I am very high on Dallas Goedert, and I may be in the minority there, but everybody draws the attention towards Zach Ertz. But the reality is Dallas Goedert is the number 2 target. I mean, you talked about they don't really have any wide receivers. Dallas Goedert was second in the team in targets last season. I don't think that's going to change. This is still a team that relies heavily on the tight end. Dallas Goedert is rarely drafted, which is insanity to me because he was the 10th tight end in fantasy points last year. 10th, and he's a guy that's not being drafted. And I could argue he has the same opportunity for targets last year as he did, or this year as he does last year. So I like Goddard a lot. I guess this is more of my Dallas Goedert PA. The Washington football team did allow the 3rd most points to tight ends last season, so there is an opportunity here. That defense should be improved with Ron Rivera at the helm, but actually 3rd worst. I think I said 4th, but either way, 3rd worst. And so there should be some opportunity there for the pass catchers there.
All right. Yeah, again, we're gonna, like I said, we got to be rooting for Philly to throw up 51 points if we want all these offensive players to get their points. Going on to my tight end, it's Chris Herndon going up against my Buffalo Bills, but he seems to be the only other guy outside of Jameson Crowder that has a little bit of rep with Sam Darnold. They brought in Chris Hogan not too long ago, actually, and he's already on the starting roster. They brought in Brashad Perriman this offseason, too, so he's in there. And then, obviously, Jameson Crowder, who last year in 2 games versus Buffalo, Week 17 was the one game, and then Week 1 was the other game. 23% of his total target share came in those 2 games. So Crowder, he's gonna get looked at a lot. But they need another guy outside of Crowder. I think it's going to be Chris Herndon. He seems to be a sleeper for DFS this week. He seems to be a sleeper for because you know that they're going to be playing from behind. Buffalo, they're going to be able to put up some points, but even if it's not like a huge blowout, it's going to be the defense is enough to where they could stop the Jets, and the Jets are going to have to try to score somehow. Le'Veon Bell, they want to try to feed Le'Veon Bell a little bit more. They did bring in Frank Gore this year, which for whatever reason, I don't know. We don't know what the Jets are doing. But I think that Chris Herndon could see double-digit targets. The Bills' defense, like I said, overall, it's really good. The safeties are 2 of the better duos of safeties in the league. But I could still see some openings in the secondary where Chris Herndon, even if he doesn't get into the end zone, he's going to get his yardage and he's going to get some catches. And that's going to be good enough if you're in a PPR league as a tight end. He could end up finishing this week as a tight end one. I don't think he's going to be the tight end one with guys like Travis Kelce and George Kittle and stuff like that, Hayden Hurst, but I think he could be up there as far as a tight end one if he gets enough looks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of looking at these streamers is just looking at the potential game flow, which you kind of already mentioned. I think that's the important piece here is that most likely the Jets are going to be playing from behind. I was just looking quickly to see the game script from last season. Darnold against the Bills last year had 41 attempts and 36 attempts, which were his second and fourth highest on the entire season. So it kind of matches up with what you said. So there should be an opportunity for a lot of pass attempts, which means some points for his catchers.
Yeah, no, Herndon obviously had that suspension last year in week 1, so he wasn't there. But then week 17, I believe he played there with Darnold, and then I know the Jets won that game too, but Buffalo benched a lot of their starters. But that's beside the point. Um, Going on to the yes, we got a nice little kicker here. What do we got for kickers?
Are you excited to talk about kickers? Because you should be. So my kicker is Jason Myers of the Seattle
Great
Seahawks.
last name. Great last name.
Best last name ever, I would say. But I mean, when it comes to kickers, once again, you're looking at game script a little bit. You're trying to target a kicker that's going to be in a high-scoring matchup. That's what I think more than anything. This is an opportunity for me to say that the Falcons' defense stinks because I just like bringing that up as frequently as I can. So the Seahawks are up against the Falcons this week, and it's kind of funny when you do look at it. The Falcons gave up the third most points to kickers last year, and that's because their defense wasn't great last year as well. So there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game. So, I mean, both Young Ho Koo and I just wanted to say that, and Jason Myers should both have an opportunity to score a good amount of points this week.
Yeah, and I got Michael Badgley from the LA Chargers. I think that is another game that we could see a lot of back and forth action. Before Derwin James went down, a lot of me choosing I chose the Chargers in a lot of pick'ems. I still think that they're going to win, but I think it's going to be a little bit closer. Not that Derwin James is the whole defense, but it definitely makes it a little bit harder on the Chargers defense. But I think this game could be back and forth. I know the Bengals defense, like the other defenses that we mentioned already, they've improved as well. They got a lot of defensive backs just from Minnesota. I mean, it seems like Minnesota just gave them all their defensive backs this year, but it's going to take some time to gel together. And I think that Tyrod is going to be able to move the ball enough with Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry, and Austin Eckler to at least get into field goal range and get Badgley some 3-pointers. But if not, at least get some touchdowns too and get enough. I mean, you're probably looking at, I'd say maybe a final score of like 27-24. So that's what, 3 extra points and then a field goal or 2 field goals. So 10 points there. I mean, that's solid for a kicker. I mean, you really can't expect too much from any specific kicker, but I think that's pretty solid there.
Yup. That's my analysis on that. Yup.
I mean, you really can't talk too much about
No,
kickers. It's just
it's like you don't need a second opinion on
if
the
you're
kicker.
drafting today or tomorrow, you're either drafting your kicker that's going to play week 1, and you might even play him up until their bye week and just not even care about it, or you're just picking up the top guy that's on the list. You're really not looking at kicker matchups.
Oh, you should be.
I look at kickers in a dome, maybe kickers on high octane offenses. I have grabbed Matt Prater a couple times. I don't know where he was on our list too, but it was yeah. I mean, it's a kicker. What are you gonna do? Now, where you should be looking if you're streaming, and this is a position that you do stream pretty much every week, unless you have somebody like San Fran or Baltimore, something like that. But is your defense, and you already kind of alluded to my defense a little bit earlier, but let's talk about yours first.
Oh, fine. Yeah, I mean, so initially you got your list to me first, so I couldn't pick the defense that you're going to talk about, but they're the ones that I pretty exclusively have been drafting late slash picking up after the draft to play them week 1. But another one that's kind of intriguing to me is the second Monday night game, the Titans versus the Broncos. I actually have the Titans as another streaming defense that I like this week. Drew Lock wasn't optimal if you were trying to stream defenses last year, but I mean, I love the Titans defense. I love what Mike Vrabel is building. Their defense should be even better than it was last year, especially with the addition of Clowney. He probably won't have a ton of reps in week 1, but I expect the Titans defense to be really successful this year. And as much as we talk about the Broncos and all these fun new weapons they have, I mean, it's going to take time for them to gel. A lot of these weapons that we talk about, they're young guys when we're talking about Jerry Judy and KJ Hamler potentially. But so I think it's going to take some time. It's also a new offense. I've talked about that a few times. So you got a young QB in a new offense on Monday Night Football. I think there's going to be some opportunities for the Titans to eat Drew Lock alive. And that's not to say Drew Lock's not going to have a fantastic season, but I think it's a big test for him week one because I think the Titans could be a top 10 defense this year. And they're really not being drafted like a top 10 defense in most leagues that I'm in. So I'm interested to see that matchup, and I think that it could be rewarding.
Yeah, I haven't really grabbed them at all. I haven't really thought about them like that, but definitely makes some good points. The defense that I wanted, but they ended up being in the top 12, was the Chargers. I've been grabbing them
Yep.
everywhere. I know you were probably looking at that too. They play the Bengals week one. They got Joe Burrow, the rookie, coming in, and we don't know how that offense is going to look. Even though the Bengals do have on paper a pretty strong looking offense, we don't know how they're actually going to perform. But couldn't go with them because they were in the top 12, so I had to go somewhere else. And I think this one might even be better. It's the Indianapolis Colts. They go up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who you already mentioned earlier. The Jaguars' offense is not good. They just got rid of Leonard Fournette not too long ago. Josh Oliver, who's not really a big, huge name, but he's going to be out most, if not all, of the season with an injury. So their only threats on offense really are DJ Chark. If they could get D.D. Westbrook involved, maybe him. I like Tyler Eifert a lot this year. I think that he could be a threat, but even then, you're looking at Gardner Minshew trying to get the ball to DJ Chark, D.D. Westbrook, and Tyler Eifert. On the Colts side, the defense, you got probably the number one IDP in Darius Leonard. And then you're mixing them in with DeForest Buckner, who they traded for at the draft or before the draft. You got Justin Houston, you got Xavier Rhodes coming in. So just overall, this defense, they have a lot of plus matchups this year. And starting with week one, I don't have the schedule beyond week one in front of me, and I don't want to really kind of just pause and waste your time. But you could grab them week one and possibly even use them longer than that because I think that they're going to have a lot of very good matchups this year where you're going to want to use them. But week one, if you got your draft tonight, 14th, 15th round, try to grab them if you can. If you see them there floating around on waivers after your draft, grab them if you can because they have probably the best matchup of the week that you're not really overpaying for a defense. You're not going out there and getting San Francisco in the 8th or ninth round or Chicago in the 10th round, Pittsburgh in the 8th round or whatever. You can literally get these guys for free and have the potential to put up 20 fantasy points in week one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's interesting from the other end. My boy Gardner Minshew should have an opportunity to throw the ball a lot and get lots of garbage time points. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough. It's going to be a rough year for the Jaguars overall, and the Colts need to set the tone from week one, and I think that they will. This is an underrated defense. They were the 14th best fantasy defense last year. You mentioned DeForest Buckner, who's one of the best defensive tackles in football, who they acquired. So I wouldn't be surprised if they finish as a top 12 unit this year.
All right, so just to recap, I had Cam Newton at quarterback, Boston Scott at running back, Deshaun Jackson at wide receiver, Chris Herndon at tight end, Michael Badgley at kicker, and the Indianapolis Colts defense at defense.
At defense, yes. I had Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback, Marlon Mack against the Jaguars at running back, Deontay Johnson versus the Giants, Dallas Goedert as my tight end, Jason Myers as my kicker, and then my defense was the Tennessee Titans. I think we need to put these together as a lineup and see who finishes with a better record at the end of the year.
Yeah, let's forward at least put a DFS together for week one and see what happens. But yeah, that's it for week one streamers. Like I said, as the season goes on, the streamer show is going to be a little bit different because obviously we're going to have injuries, we're going to have different matchups. We don't know like who's like week one. Marlon Mack is a good start because he's the running back that's been in the system for a little bit now. But then Jonathan Taylor could take over if he has a really good game against Jacksonville. So as the season goes on, the show is going to change a little bit. As is the rest of the shows that we're going to do for leading into week one, and then as opposed to the rest of the season, we got a lot of stuff to get ready for, but we're there. I mean, the season starts this week, kicking off with Houston at Kansas City, and then we got a full slate of games on Sunday starting at 1 o'clock Eastern. going into Sunday night, and then we got 2 Monday night games. So we're here for your streamers. We're here for your DFS talk. We're here for your recap. We're here for your waiver wire. We're here for your injury report. We're going to be here Sunday morning for start sit. So that's going to be a live show. So make sure you tune into that. You can ask your questions. We'll see them right on the screen and answer them there. You're going to see our beautiful faces all season long. We're going to throw a little caveman into the mix, a little Apex into the mix. I think Blake's going to be coming on for some shows. So we're here for you guys. So just this is the first show of the in-season stuff. Of many. We're going to be here 7 days a week. So we appreciate you guys for listening and watching, and we'll see you guys next episode.